Okay, so what's up, guys? Be ready for a super scuffed video, but we're trying this shit out for fun. I'm gonna be going over what happened week one against Plaz. I feel like I came in with a pretty good overall plan. I just made some greedy plays and kind of ignored certain things that Plaz definitely took advantage of. But with that being said, let's talk about the teams. So here's my team on the top. It is my weather team. Screamtail being my only weather setter essentially guarantees that it comes every week, which is not honestly the biggest issue. It's very versatile. It can do a lot of different things. And around that, I have mons that work in both weathers, along with Deoxys Speed just for a lot of flexibility. Going into Plaz's team, I honestly felt like Sun had a super good matchup, and I mean, he himself said that. His Glamora, I believe, is Terra Poison, Terra Grass, neither of which do anything great against Sun teams. Cinderace benefits from Sun pretty well, but Gligar hard walls Cinderace even in Sun. Obviously, King Gambit is a huge threat, especially as more things die. I figured Scarf Noivern was coming. I was correct. It was pretty obvious, not like a super big prediction or anything. I did not expect him to bring his Dunsparce. We'll get into the replays here in a sec. But just talking about my thought process. He predicted a Scavalier to come, which, I mean, makes sense because it hard walls both Glamora and... I wouldn't say hard walls Mega Guard because Mystical Fire, obviously, but does great into both of those. Also does decently into Araquanid, not the greatest though. Speaking of Araquanid, Araquanid's a huge problem for my team. Water Bubble makes it so I don't get great chip if I go for Steam. What? Fucking hell, this is embarrassing. Hydro Steam. Good lord. Because it resists that already, and Water Bubble's going to neutralize that. Also, Liquidation hurts like a motherfucker from that thing. So this right here is the team I brought. We got Walking Wake, Brute Bonnie, typical Sun team, Mega Doom, a Scavalier for the Glamora, and Mega Guard. My boy Screamtail set the weather and just be a nuisance. And then Gligar for the Cinderace. Now, we can look at my spreads here. Nothing too special. The only really interesting thing was, since I figured he was bringing Scarf Noivern, I basically just wanted things to outspeed Mega Guard, like max speed Timid. So I only had to do 184 speed for Wake to do that. Could put the rest into HP. I did throw the specs on there because Scarf, I'm going to keep harping on this. Scarf Noivern is going to outspeed Scarf max speed nature, Walking Wake. So it didn't feel like it did anything. So I just wanted the extra damage on specs. This is kind of the first point where I got a little greedy. So my Brute Bonnet is Terra Dark, Terra Poison. Terra Poison is very, very good into Plaz's team. It allows me to wall Glamora, either Terra, and it does really well into Mega Guard, but Mega Guard could sidekick me. I die one shot to Hyper Voice or sidekick, depending on if I've Terra'd or not. So that was kind of spooky, and that's kind of one of the reasons I went with Dark Terra. I didn't really want to play that guessing game against a player of Plaz's caliber. So I just wanted to all-in Terra Dark, and something's taking 80% from a sucker if he attacks into me, which is a very obvious game plan, and Plaz played around it very well. Mega Houndoom, I could actually go modest max speed to outspeed Mega Guard, which was great. A Scavalier, just here to be a nuisance and a good wall. And then Heat Rock for extra sun. Other than that, pretty typical stuff. Speed really being the only interesting spread. Now, we can get into some replays. There's only two, spoiler alert. But first one here, we'll go through it. So, I mentioned earlier that I may have not respected the Araquanid enough, and we're going to see that play out in game one. So here, I thought, first turn, I thought the Draco, I knew this thing is going to be especially bulky, but I mean, it's not going to want to take a Draco Meteor. So I thought he was going to go guard, for sure. But he stayed in. I could have done 60-ish% to this, which would have been a completely different start to the game. He would have infested me, but it still would have been worth. So he infests my Gligar. Not a huge deal because, as I'll reveal, I have the U-turn. And so go into my boy Scavalier. Takes more damage than I wanted at the time. And the defense drop makes it so I don't really want... Because I want to keep him at a respectable amount of HP. Enough to live a Mystical Fire from Guard. Because Guard dies to an Iron Hit if I live whatever hit. But that defense drop makes it so I cannot stay in. And this is where we're just going to see this Araquanid kind of put me in a pack. He gets his webs up. I Sunny Day. And that honestly wasn't for me to get any of like the big damage benefits. That was more so for me to reduce his liquidation damage. Because that shit did too much to a Scavalier, and Gligar's not going to want to take those. So here we have Infestation turns. It's a bunch of Leech Life, Play Rough, Wish. So we can skip forward until I'm not infested. Cool. So I believe, yep, go Scavalier here. He infestations me. Annoying. The Wish gets me back to full. And so here, I believe I knock off. And after watching Plaz's video, he was definitely predicting that. But like, as he mentioned, he doesn't really have any item that he wants knocked off. Cinderace was Boots. He, at the time, wanted the Scarf on Noivern to outspeed Scarf Walking Wake. He didn't know that I was Specs. Glamora. I don't even know what Glamora's item was, to be honest with you. And obviously Eviolite is huge for Dunsparce. So he stays in, liquidations, gets another defense drop. I get the lefties off. And here I have to swap again because that defense drop is obnoxious. And so I believe I go... I sacked off my Escavalier here. I think my thought process at the time was at 26%. It could live a Hyper Voice from Gardevoir pretty easily, but like it doesn't outspeed and it's going to die to Mystical Fire. So again, this Araquanid was a huge problem for me. So here I get the webs off. Take a lot from liquidation. Araquanid. Again, I can't state enough. Araquanid really just bodied me. And so 37% with a Dragon Pulse. This is where Plaz realized I was Specs because that damage caught him off guard. And so knowing that, he knows that I cannot touch Gardevoir. So here, this is where I messed up because I let Escavalier take too much damage and die. And so Gardevoir really gets to just like, with that out of the way, really has nothing too threatening to it. Brute in the Sun is going to do a ton with a Crunch basically OHKOs. Sucker Punch gets like 80-ish% to max special attack, max speed, which Plaza set was not. So here he Hyper Voices, does a lot. Yeah. I ended up sacking my Screamtail there. And so here is where he reveals the Will-O-Wisp. And I thought the Will-O-Wisp could be a possibility. But again, prep-wise, I think I got a little greedy. Because I considered Lumberry on the Bonnet. The problem is I die to a Hyper Voice, like OHKO. So, as I'll reveal later, I have the Fairy Berry. I think it's called the Rosalie Berry. We can just check. Yeah, the Rosalie Berry. And my thinking was, if I can live the Hyper Voice, I can crunch the Gardevoir, it dies, and then Terra Dark Sucker Punch is like, I think Noivern takes 85, 88%, so like Rocks, Cinderace is not wanting to take that. It really cooked his team. It was just really greedy. Terra Poison would have been way better. But so I get burned, he lands it. That's life. Here's where it definitely is a little obvious he's a bulkier guard. Still does a ton of damage. Yeah, and here, like, the Sucker Punch is super obvious. I wanted to crunch again, but I thought on the like, if he was going to give me an opportunity to kill this thing, I wanted to. So even though it was the most obvious play, I still wanted to make it. So Sucker Punch, nothing. Here was definitely... So he hadn't revealed anything on this yet, but like I figured it was going to have Rocks and like... So I shouldn't Sucker here, but I do. Oh no. I don't know why I close combated. I should definitely have just crunched. That was definitely a misplay in hindsight. But yeah, so I got a little bit of chip off. He got his Rocks up. Again, Sucker Punch is super obvious. He's kind of just burn stalling me. Yep. And so I died to one more burn proc. And like this is like the 50-50 of do I crunch or do I Sucker. I believe I click Sucker just on the off chance he lets me get more chip. Yep, and he does. So, but it also allows him to get both Toxic Spikes up, which as we've seen and will see, these hazards are such a pain for my team. Gligar goes down to the Terra Grass. And so, honestly, Houndoom's in a decent spot. At least I thought. He has a Max Spadef Dunsparce in the back with Eviolite. So, not the greatest spot to be in, but a decent spot to pick up some kills. Drop the Dark Pulse because it killed, and if you wanted to swap in anything, it hits everything for neutral. He lands the high jump kick. Game 1 was truly just Araquanid Diff. And so going into Game 2, I really had to think harder about what I was doing to handle that. And then here is he confirmed the specs, but he knew. And I assumed this was Scarf. I never found out because I never had anything fast enough. Like, they would outspeed it naturally. But it was, it's a pretty standard set for Noivern. So, Game 1 was pretty rough. I think I play a lot better in Game 2. I think I make some decent reads. But there are a few things I could have done better. And we'll get into that. So, here, I honestly... Again, this is where if I wasn't greedy and looking at like the sweeping potential of Terra Dark Sucker and Crunch, Terra Poison into this Araquanid, I could just lead Brute and threaten this thing out easily. Because, I mean, nothing wants to come into a Seed Bomb, or at the time he thought maybe a Bullet Seed. Even though Noivern resists it, it's gonna die to the Sucker Punch afterwards. So, I mean, lessons learned. Don't be as greedy. Like, with a defensive Terra that was so good into his team this week, lesson learned. I was just greedy. I U-turn out, and here is where I looked back at Game 1, and I'm like, okay, last time he didn't stay in. He knows I'm Specs. So, like, I'm just going to fire off a Draco Meteor. If he goes into guard, like, I'm in a tough spot, but I have to get damage on this thing. So, drop the Draco. It lands. It does 65% to this especially bulky Araquanid, which is great. That essentially kills it if I get Rocks up. Now, the problem here is that I am infested. I can't swap, and I'm -2 locked into Draco. Plaz makes a pretty big misplay here. He, after talking to him, didn't realize I was infested. And so he predicted the swap and goes into Cinderace. Yep, and Cinderace, even at -2, is taking 73 from that. I believe my infestation ends. Gligar hard walls this. Yeah, 10% from a high jump kick. I needed him to miss some high jump kicks. Not that Cinderace did a ton. It honestly did nothing this series. But, I mean, a kill is a kill. Like, it's something I don't have to worry about. So Gligar goes off. And right here, I was talking to chat and thinking about Earthquaking. Because I knew he was going to U-turn. And, like, he has nothing that wants to take the EQ except Noivern. But he made it clear game 1 that Noivern is in the back just for Walking Wake. So I didn't think it was coming in until Wake was locked in. And if I had Earthquake, could have got some nice chip on the guard. I get my rocks up though. Rocks are great too. Definitely not a huge deal. Definitely hurts Noivern. Basically means Araquanid dies when it comes in, which is a big bonus to the game for me because, as we've seen, Araquanid cooks my team a little bit. So I go Scavalier here. A very obvious play. If I were able to win this game too, spoiler alert, I don't. A play like this, I could easily go into Houndoom pre-Mega, predicting the Mystical Fire. And I mean, he does Mystical Fire here because it's such an obvious play. Which, I mean, well played to him. It's an obvious read, but he makes the read. So Scavalier takes a ton of damage. I mean, he has to click Mystical Fire because Hyper Voice, as we'll see later, does 17% on a high roll. And so I get my Houndoom in. And so here... okay, here I make a super greedy play. In front of the Gardevoir, I figured he was going to swap because he didn't want to take a ton of damage on it, because if that thing dies, Brute Bonnet kind of goes crazy. Like, Gardevoir really was making Brute Bonnet, like, keeping it in check. And so, knowing that, I made a super risky play, especially with guard carrying Hyper Voice. I substitute in front of the guard. Probably one of the better plays I made. But as we'll see here, this Dunsparce is super bulky. 28% from a Mega Houndoom. You know, has the Earth Power. So I go Screamtail here because this seems like a free opportunity to set up Sun. But in hindsight, I could have went Brute Bonnet and just tried to Terra Dark Crunch this thing, because I knew it was especially bulky based off how little it took, and a Terra Dark Crunch could have came very close to killing it from 60%. Maybe not though. Dunsparce is a pretty beefy boy. So I get in the Screamtail. I see he's body slamming, fishing for the paras. Annoying. I don't want really anything to get parried. If anything, I would be okay with a Scavalier at this point, or Gligar. But since I don't really want anything to get parried, I leave in Screamtail, let it get parried. And now I swap a Scavalier. He goes Cinderace. Terrible matchup for me, but Gligar hard walls that thing, so not a huge deal. Again, here, hindsight's 2020. Click Earthquake. He's not sending in the Noivern. He's saving that specifically for Wake. So just click Earthquake. Get good chip off whatever comes in. And if he goes into Glamora, he hasn't terrored yet. It is quad effective. But I second guess myself. I know he's U-turning, and so I go for the slow U-turn momentum play, but it really ends up biting me in the butt. There's his U-turn, and he goes Glamore. Earthquake would have been an amazing play because it's just one layer of toxic spikes. My rocks are still up on his side, and it's honestly a completely different game if I get that EQ off. But that's part of the game. Sometimes you second guess yourself, and sometimes you make the wrong play. Come in with Houndoom. I get poisoned. I would love to know the reasoning behind taking solar power on the turn you come in, but, whatever. So, here I just Dark Pulse for good damage. He sacks off the... a Flamethrower. It did more in the sun. He sacks off the Arachnid, which is fine. I've basically got one more turn. Yep. In comes Guard. And I believe I just stay in here. Do I defog? I live on 3. I do defog. Get rid of those toxic spikes. They're a pain in the ass. And so knowing he's going for Hyper Voice, I believe I swap into a Scavalier. I just keep Gligar more so as, at this point, like, death fodder. Because he has a lot of mons that, like, I kind of just need to position a threat in front of them, but it's hard to swap in on. And so Death Fodder, not the end of the world. In comes a Scavalier, eats the Hyper Voice. I swap out into Scream, take the Mystical Fire. And so this turn is painful. I'm not sure how much of a difference it makes. I click Sunny Day here. And as you'll see, I get Parrot. The question is, with Sun Up, do I kill his team? Dunsparce at 60%, Glamora at 80%, Cinderace at 26%, Guard. So essentially, if I get Sun Up here, he kills Screamtail next turn. I go into Houndoom. I get one turn with a lot of damage off, or I go Wake. Either way, I get a free swap in. He no longer has the Arachnid, so the Hydra's team is cooking his team. But, I mean, it is what it is. Part of the game. Get parried. He apologizes, which, I mean, very nice of him. It's the game. Hacks are part of it. Would it have made a huge difference is the real question. Out comes Houndoom. Just gonna Flamethrower, do as much as I can. It does 30, so it's a roll to kill. He's at 29.5, I did 29.8. As we'll see here, he lives on 1%, gets his roost off. And so here, I go for the Dark Pulse Flinch. Is what it is, don't get it. Hacks weren't on my side, but, I mean, you got to position well regardless. And so in comes Brute Bonnet. In comes the Glim. I tear a Dark Crunch, do a billion to it. He gets Toxic Spikes up. Again, super obvious Sucker Punch, but like, I don't want to take a super big... I want to keep this thing healthy. And so I was willing to risk the rocks going up to try to potentially catch him lacking, which he's a good player, so he's not. I get him this time. He gets up both layers of Toxic Spikes. So in comes Guard. I know he's going to Will-O-Wisp. And so here is probably the best play I made of the set. I know he wants to burn my Brute Bonnet, but he has Toxic Spikes up. So earlier when I saved Gligar, it actually matters a lot. So I swap into Gligar, let it die to rocks. And so next time I bring in Brute Bonnet, it gets poisoned and cannot be burned, which is terrifying for his team. Yep, sack off the Gligar. He goes for the Willow. In comes Walking Wake. Out comes the Dunsparce. Swallows that. Especially defensive Dunsparce was a problem. Cool. So, kills my Walking Wake. Which, like, an argument could be made to save Walking Wake there. But the problem is it always gets outsped by Scarf Noivern, and at 50%, it's dying to a Dragon Pulse. So, like, I just needed it to do as much damage as it could. And so, at the end of the game, we're all in on the Brute Bonnet. It's the reason I went Dark Terror to potentially sweep late game. I obviously outspeed this, so I just throw out the Crunch. Bow. Cannot be burned. And so, but the problem is, if this was poison and not toxic, I think I get another kill. It's close. Noivern, I believe, can barely live a Sucker Punch. And we didn't get to see it in the game, but he did tell me Cinderace also had Will-O-Wisp, so he probably just stalls me with Willow if I'm trying to Sucker. But him getting both layers up definitely hurt. Eat my berry. Still did an absurd amount. Lives the Crunch, unfortunately, and I mean that's just gonna be game. Yep, I Crunch because I mean it only makes sense for him to swap. Yeah, and I mean that's gonna be the game. Reveals the Flamethrower on Noivern because I mean obviously. So, I mean GG's to Plaz. He has my number. I think when I play Plaz is like, it shows the gap between like prep skill. Because like while I can identify a threat, so like I knew Araquanid was a problem for my team, the preparation around it was not there. Like I should have definitely came in with a better plan for Araquanid. I kind of thought that I would just like wall it with a Scavalier or Brute Bonnie and kill it, but that definitely was not the case, and he early on realized Araquanid did really well into my team. The Infestation was great tech, considering he knows that my only weather setter is Screamtail, and he can lock it in, wasting Sun turns. So, I mean, dude, hats off to Plaz. Super good. Set. I'm kind of happy with how I played game 2. Definitely some mistakes that could have, or I wouldn't say mistakes, some reads I could have made, like the Earthquake, that could have potentially changed the game. Game 1 was just the Araquanid taking over, but game 2 I'm pretty happy with how I played. I think I made some good plays along with some bad ones, but yeah, I mean, GG's to Plaz. Hopefully I can get the dub next week. Appreciate y'all watching.